And so today's lesson is an interesting lesson. What is unity? What is unity? We often say that unity is a worldwide spiritual movement, that we are dedicated to the ongoing awareness of the Spirit within all, the Spirit within every being. That God, divine love, life, universal truth, all that is, whatever we want to call the divine, is at the center of every being on earth. So how did we come to be? How did this new thought thing happen? How did we get where we are today with over 900 unity leaders serving unity centers? The majority of those, around 800, are located in the U.S., but here are some interesting figures for you. Then comes Canada with 23, the Dominican Republic with 15, Nigeria 10, Australia 8, Great Britain and Northern Ireland 5. Unity centers can also be found in Argentina, Colombia, Guyana, Grenada, Jamaica, Malta, Mexico, New Zealand, Portugal, Switzerland, and Trinidad and Tobago. And these are the only the ones that completed their annual reports this year. So the numbers are actually higher than that. So we are truly worldwide when we say we're a worldwide movement. But how did we come to be in the first place? Well, unity is considered a leader in the New Thought movement, a movement that began in North America in the early 19th century. It was led by Phineas Quimby and Franz Mesmer, who were focused on mental healing and the power of our thoughts. And it was preceded by ancient thought, nothing new about it, accumulated wisdom and philosophy from a variety of origins, including Taoist, Vedic, Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist cultures, and their related belief systems, primarily regarding the interaction between thought, belief, consciousness of the human mind, and the effects within and beyond the human mind. New Thought holds that God is everywhere present, and that true human selfhood is divine, and divine thought is a force for good. Yes, there is sickness and lack and struggle. Those things also are real human conditions. And that right thinking can help us move through those human events. The way we hold them, the way we see them, and the thoughts we have and the words we speak to affirm the truth behind every need has power. So Coy has a slide for us to look at that is the development of New Thought. If you bring that up for us, Coy. Yeah, that's a lot of bubbles. Not quite yet. That's a lot of bubbles. You'll see that there are primarily two bubbles at the top. Okay, we've got the one to the left, and that's labeled healers. And that's where you will find Phineas Quimby and Franz Mesmer in that bubble. And at the very top on the left are the teachings of Jesus. And you can see those teachings go over to the blue bubble as well. The blue bubble is labeled philosophers and theologians. Okay, and this is where you find Plato and Socrates. Not to worry, they do influence unity also, but through an indirect link. For the Fillmores found true inspiration through the Transcendentalist and Ralph Waldo Emerson. Other significant influences on the philosophers and theologians side are Meister Eckhart, Emanuel Swedenborg. And look at where all those lines cross and swirl at the bottom, or the bottom third, how they all cross and swirl. And those are the New Thought founders and leaders. Just above the pink box at the bottom, those are the New Thought founders and leaders, which include Hinduism and Buddhism, eventually leading to Merlin Charles Fillmore. Go ahead, Larry. We're going to distribute copies so that you don't have to struggle so much to see the one that we have up here. But we're going to go into a little bit more detail as well. You can also see how all of these lines, with the exception of Christian Science on the far left, see Christian Science over here, and then you see Unitarian Universalist Church over here, outside the New Thought bubble. Because Unity's foundational teachings are the teachings of Jesus, that's why we call ourselves culturally Christian and spiritually inclusive. Culturally Christian, but spiritually inclusive. And the mother of New Thought is right underneath the yellow. You hear about Emma Curtis Hopkins. She's called the teacher of teachers. Emma Curtis Hopkins. And off to the side next to Myrtle is Emily Cady. We hear a lot about Emily Cady as well as some of the early works. So if you look at the dates of the leaders right across the bottom, Myrtle Fillmore, Charles, Nona Brooks, Melinda Kramer, Ernest Holmes, when you look at those dates, it causes me to wonder, if I didn't know already, what the heck was happening at this time, that there was such an explosion of this different way of thinking, of believing that that divine essence, that pure heart is within every person, that we don't need an intermediary to speak to God presence, and that that essence of good is within us. Well, I'll tell you what happened, because remember, when a group of people focuses on an idea, especially a new idea, it travels through the ethers. We are one. What happens over here affects what happens over here. It's one of the many reasons to keep our thoughts as positive as possible, because there is a race consciousness up here that is often filled with fear and anger, and we don't want to be part of that. And yet, because we are all one, we feel the effects of that. Well, what happened was in 1893, the world turned its attention to Chicago when it hosted the World's Columbia Exposition. During the exposition, congresses were held in the areas of government, jurisprudence, finance, science, literature, and religion, quote, to bring about a real fraternity of nations and unite the enlightened people of the whole earth in a general cooperation for the attainment of the great ends for which humanity is organized. They didn't call it then, but it was the first parliament of world religions. This was a formal public meeting of representatives of the major religions in the history of the world. Look at that. Is that not amazing? And has been called a watershed event in American history. It saw the assertion of Catholicism and Judaism as mainstream American religions, and it recognized both African American and women as religious leaders. An unprecedented number of women spoke at the Parliament from various spiritual backgrounds. It marked the beginning of interfaith dialogue. Instead of everyone being in their own column, now there was intersection. Non-Western religions also have recognized its importance. Hinduism and Buddhism trace their beginnings in the West to their participation in this event, into the 1893 World Parliament of Religions. A captivating Hindu monk, Swami Vivekananda, addressed 5,000 assembled delegates, greeting them with the words, "Sisters and brothers of America." His declaration introduced Hinduism to America. There were Buddhist and Jain and ancient Indian religion and Muslim speakers. They were all present at this gathering, and they all got to speak. One contemporary described the event, quote, "It was perhaps the most important religious gathering which has ever assembled," unquote. Can you imagine the excitement and the curiosity to be exposed to these different ways of religious community, different ways of even speaking about God, the excitement had to have been palpable. And guess who was present? Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, the founders of Unity. They were there. They were incredibly moved by what they heard and felt. They were already interested in the Transcendentalist movement in the U.S. Their first son was named in honor of Ralph Waldo Emerson, his name Waldo Rickert Fillmore, who they called Rickert. Lowell Page Fillmore, who was called Lowell, Page was Myrtle's maiden name, was named after a poet, an Atlantic monthly editor, James Russell Lowell. And then the third son came along later, John Royal Fillmore. All three sons lived with their families eventually at Unity Farm, which we call Unity Village. They all lived there with their wives, and it sounds lovely, doesn't it? Well, the Fillmore's life was not without tragedy. Was not without tragedy. Royal's wife died shortly after giving birth to their daughter Frances. Royal died shortly after, within the next 18 months. That left Frances an orphan at the age of 2, raised by Lowell and his wife there. But Myrtle and Charles believed what they had learned about the power of their thoughts. They knew that tragedy happened. They knew that grief and loss happened. They also remained centered in light and love. It did not shake their faith. So what is unity? Well, I'm borrowing heavily from Reverend Rachel Wooten, who's one of our very newly ordained unity ministers who lives in New Zealand. Charles and Myrtle never set out to build a traditional church. That is very true. Their mission wasn't about creating institutions, rules, or rigid structures, but rather about empowering individuals through spiritual education, healing, and the metaphysical understanding of truth. Notice how we don't say Reverend Charles or Reverend Myrtle. That's because their legacy was not built on religious titles or hierarchy, but on deeply personally lived spirituality that invited others to their own awakening. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Jesus said, "Do as I do, behave as I behave." That's how they lived. They wanted each person to discover the truth within them. That's what unity is all about, is that same empowerment. They weren't building a monument. They were igniting a movement, not a church with walls, but a consciousness without limits. Not a religion to follow, but a truth to embody. They gave lectures on Sunday afternoons. Everyone went to their own churches, their own faith traditions. Then in the afternoon, they gathered to hear the lectures from Myrtle and Charles. The Sunday service wasn't part of a formal blueprint. It emerged organically. It was a natural response to the deep yearning people had to learn how to heal themselves. And they had Myrtle as the great example of her healing herself over a period of 18 months to 2 years. They also wanted to know how to connect with the divine, that they didn't have to go through anyone else to connect with that deep divine. They wanted to experience community and shared spiritual practices, to receive soul nourishment. As we continue this work, it's vital to remember we are not here to replicate, to duplicate traditional church models or structures or processes. We are not building walls or hierarchies. What we are creating is a space for spiritual exploration, for awakening, for education, personal transformation. When we gather on Sundays, it's not for rigidity or for religious routine. It's for something deeper. It's for something alive, exciting, dynamic, and organic. A unity-based center serves 5 vital purposes: spiritual education and empowerment. When we gather as a community, we want to deepen and reinforce our spiritual practices. We're learning them and we're living them ourselves. We're taking our spiritual tools and we're trying them out in the real world. It's not about teaching dogma. It's about exploring together how to embody a presence that, yes, is also outside of us, but is also in us. How to embody that and carry that with us. It's not what we believe in unity that matters, but how we use what we believe. Consciousness and community building. These gatherings are about connection. All of our gatherings are about connection and amplifying a shared intention. When two or more are gathered. In elevated consciousness, a powerful, powerful force field is created. It anchors us, helping us to remember and embody our teachings. Spiritual healing and alignment. People may arrive feeling fragmented or anxious or depleted, but through music and meditation, prayer, metaphysical teachings, we help recenter, reattune, and realign each person with the divine. Each Sunday becomes a sacred recalibration. For healing is not changing who you are, it's remembering who you are. The fourth is demonstrating the Christ consciousness. This isn't about worshiping an external Savior, although you are welcome to if that speaks to you. It's about realizing and authentically living from the divine within ourselves. Sunday becomes a sacred space to embody and express the Christ idea, to live from Christ consciousness, and to honor, acknowledge the great I am that each of you are, the great I am, that presence. And the fifth one is spiritual activation and action. This isn't about passive inspiration. It's about activating and living through action. We're called to be healers in our own lives, to embody abundance, to live truth no matter what we do, and to bring transformation into the world for ourselves and others, to be light bearers, to live, to love out loud. So while it may look like a service, it's not a church service in the traditional sense. It is a spiritual playground, a safe space for learning and growing and stretching. It's consciousness building. It's a sacred reminder of who we really are. So Charles and Myrtle's movement was a call to spiritual freedom, to personal empowerment and direct connection with the divine. And it's our responsibility now to keep that spirit alive, fluid, inclusive, and evolving, radically and spiritually transformative. They were the original spiritual influencers before hashtags were a thing. Unity was always meant to be a spiritual movement of awakening, not an institution of stagnation and limitation. Sometimes it's nice to remember our origins, to pause and recall that we didn't come from structure or rituals or rules, but from a spark of awakening. A movement birthed from spiritual curiosity, divine love, empowered thinking, and the belief that each soul is divine and capable of transformation. May we continue not by building walls, but by expanding consciousness. Not by becoming more church-like, but by embodying a living movement of light, truth, love, and Christ consciousness. Let's remember who we are and why we began. I'd like to close this morning with some writings from Marcus Bach. He wrote this in 1962. Marcus Bach was a very popular author who liked to read, to research and then write books about some of the more fringe religions. And he loved unity. He loved to come to Kansas City and to walk the grounds and to meet Papa Charlie. And he loved the whole thing. And this is what he says about unity. Unity is the base of learning for all people. For unity knows that above and beyond the things that separate various religions are truths which unite them. And that while many groups may be divided by non-essentials, the great essentials are those things that connect us. The God of unity is so great that it can never be expressed fully in one denomination or compress its God self into one exclusive sect. God is a prism through which the one light is refracted. God is a sea from which and into which the rivers of thought are flowing. God is love eternal, out of which love, in its myriad forms, expresses itself. God is God. And being God, God is the one presence and the one power. He goes on to say, and I love these passages, you can be a good student of unity and still worship in other faiths. For the object of worship is always God as principle. God is love. God is truth. You can sit yoga fashion if you wish, or enter the satori of Zen and say your prayers and be a unity follower. You can walk the eightfold path of the Buddha without straying from unity teachings and beliefs. You can bow 5 times towards Mecca and still be unity conscious. You can stand before the tomb of your ancestors, as does the Confucianist and the Taoist. You can say a prayer of gratitude for the influence and heritage of a departed loved one without denying what unity believes. You can sit before the sacred fire of the Parsis and gaze into the holy flames without losing your unity point of view. You can stand with a Jew over the Holy Torah, or walk with a Shintoist through the sacred groves, or chant an affirmation with a Hindu on the banks of the Ganges. You can do all these things and still be a student of unity, because there is within you a living flame of understanding that warms you with the knowledge that the Spirit of God is one Spirit. My God is your God. Your God is mine. And finally, he says, unity knows that people cannot be argued into religion. They must be loved into it. So we can choose to look at the world and all those who reside on this beautiful blue planet with us through eyes of understanding and acceptance, witnessing one another's divinity and overlooking one another's flaws, for we all have them, recognizing the ways we share commonalities. We can choose to open our hearts to embrace and connect with our brothers and sisters of the world, wherever they are, and regardless of how different they may seem to be from us. Unity as a movement is evolving. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. To not evolve is to begin the dying process. Unity of the Keys is evolving. We've always been evolving over these many years. I hope to see many of you after the service today, right here in the sanctuary, as we move into that space of possibilities, as we're holding our first visioning session, visioning what we might look like in the future, with change there is opportunity. And if you're not able to stay today, not to worry, there will be more. There's also very large index cards back there for you to share your ideas about how you might see us in the future. This is not about fundraising. This is not about how to get more people here. This is a vision of how we would like to see unity in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Then we'll step back with creativity and imagination and work on our strategies. This is the history of New Thought, and this is a piece of the history of unity. And many of you are the history of Unity of the Keys.